I'm Adelaide Whitlock, 38, an Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and F-22 Raptor pilot. For 7 years, I carried a call sign that the entire fighter community knew, and the one man whose approval I had wanted my whole life had never once asked me what it was. But when a hangar crew chief at my new squadron asked me my call sign as a joke in front of his pilots, I said it out loud, and the room that humbled me that morning gave me something my own father never had. Have you ever been underestimated in a room by someone who had no idea who you were? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being wronged, hit that like button and subscribe. I was 7 years old the first time I told someone I was going to fly fighters, and the first person to laugh was my father. We were sitting in the bleachers at the Marine Corps Air Station Beaufort Air Show in October of 1995. My dad, Colonel Hollis Whitlock, was the demonstration narrator that year. He was up in the announcer's booth with a Coke and a microphone, and we were down in the family seats, my mom holding my hand, and my brother Foster, 2 seats over, 11 years old, reading the program. The demo flight came in low over the runway, 2 F-18 Hornets, one peeling off into a vertical climb that went so high it disappeared into the cloud line. The crowd cheered. I tugged my mom's sleeve and I told her I wanted to do that. She looked at me without smiling. She looked at me like she was checking the weather. And she said, "Okay. So learn to do that." When we got home that night, my father walked into the kitchen and asked Foster if he had liked the show. He didn't ask me. My mom told him I'd announced my plan to fly Hornets, and my father laughed and said, "Sure, sweetheart." He didn't even look at me when he said it. He said it to the inside of the refrigerator. I am going to tell you what happened over the next 30 years, because all of it matters. But the thing I want you to know up front is this. My father had a room in him, and I was not allowed in that room. Foster was. My mother knew it. I knew it. We all knew it. Nobody ever said it. And every milestone in my life I have ever wanted my father to see, my mother was the one who saw it. And the way I learned to live with that started in the bleachers at the Beaufort Air Show in 1995. There was always a framed squadron photograph in our living room. My dad's old VFA 251 squadron at Beaufort, taken sometime in 1993. 2 years before that air show. He was front and center in his flight suit. The picture was the first thing you saw when you walked in. There were no pictures of me anywhere in that room until I was 10, and my mom finally put up a school portrait on the side table. My dad never moved it. He never took it down either. It just sat there. I had a model F-22 hanging from my bedroom ceiling by the time I was 14. My mother and I built it together at the workbench in the garage on a Saturday in 2003. The year my father announced he was going to retire from the Marine Corps. We had the radio on. We had the garage door open because the glue was the kind that got into your sinuses if you didn't move air through the room. My mother had a coffee in the chipped mug she kept in the garage for garage projects. We worked for 6 hours. We built the wings rib by rib out of balsa and pinned them down to the bench with sewing pins. She tied the rudder lines with the same knot she used for fishing tackle. She handed me each piece in the order it needed to go on, without me having to ask. She knew the airplane. She had read the same library books I had read in the evenings after I had gone to bed. My mother told me, "You like the new one, the one with the diamonds, the F-22. I told her it was the best one we made, and she said, "Then it's the one you fly." That sentence stayed in my head for the next 20 years. I have heard a lot of motivational speeches in a lot of squadron auditoriums in my life, and not a single one of them has ever beaten my mother handing me a balsa wing rib in a garage in Beaufort and telling me that the F-22 was the one I would fly. My father walked through the garage twice that afternoon, on his way to the mailbox and on his way back. He looked at the bench. He did not say anything. He went into the house. My brother Foster soloed a Cessna 172 at 16. My father drove him to the airport. My father stood on the ramp and watched the airplane take off and come back. He took a photograph with a small camera, and he had it framed, and he hung it in the living room next to his VFA 251 picture. It is still there. Foster went to flight school out of high school, never went to college, never wore a uniform a day in his life, and went straight to the regionals at 22 and got his Delta hire at 27. My father called him the next Whitlock pilot the day Foster signed his first jet contract. Foster was the one with the line on his bedroom wall. Foster was the one who got asked about flying at the dinner table. I got my acceptance letter to the United States Air Force Academy in March of 2006. I was 18 years old. I came home from school and opened the mailbox, and the letter was there, and I read it standing on the front walk, and I went inside and showed my mom. My mom cried in the kitchen. She cried with her face turned to the sink so she wouldn't have to explain. When my dad got home, he read the letter, nodded once, and said, "A service academy. That's good. That's not the Naval Academy, but that's good." Foster, sitting in the recliner, said, "Congrats, kid. I got hired by Mesa today." My father turned to Foster and clapped him on the shoulder and asked him when he was going to start in Phoenix. They went into the kitchen to talk about jump seat privileges. I stood in the hallway holding my letter, and my mother came in from the kitchen and put her hand on the back of my neck and didn't say anything. That night I lay in bed and looked up at the balsa F-22 hanging from the ceiling. I had had it for 4 years by then. The paint was a little chipped. I didn't say anything to it. I just lay there. And I decided, in that bed, in that house in Beaufort, that my father was going to be a man who watched my life happen at a distance, and that I was going to do it anyway. I have never made another decision in my life that was as important as that one, and the only people who were in the room when I made it were me, the ceiling, and the airplane my mother built with me. I graduated from the Air Force Academy on May 26, 2010. I commissioned as a second lieutenant the same day. My mother flew to Colorado Springs and sat in the stands at Falcon Stadium with a paper program in her lap and a hat that the wind kept trying to take. She had bought a new dress for it. She told me later she had picked it out 3 months in advance. My father was in Atlanta that weekend. He was watching Foster get a Boeing 737 type rating signed off at the Delta Training Center. He had picked the type rating. He told me afterward like he was telling me the weather. He said, "Your brother's in Atlanta?" He picked the type rating over the parade. I didn't ask him to choose. He told me anyway. That is how he liked to deliver bad news. He liked to make sure you could not have misunderstood. I went to specialized undergraduate pilot training at Vance Air Force Base in Oklahoma right after I commissioned. It is a 2-year program, and at the end of it, you get your wings and you find out what kind of airplane you are going to fly. I finished second in my class. The number 1 student went to C-17s. I went to the fighter track and the F-22 because I had asked for the F-22 and I had earned the right to ask. My mother flew to Vance in June of 2012, and she pinned my silver wings onto my flight suit at the wing ceremony. Her hands shook. The wing commander walked up to me before the ceremony and asked me evenly, "Is your father here, Lieutenant?" I told him my father couldn't make it. The wing commander looked at me for a second longer than he had to, and then he said, "Then your mother has the honor." My mother did not know he had said that to me. I did not tell her. She pinned my wings perfectly like she had been practicing on the kitchen wall for weeks, which she had. The wing commander told me later that the only people who pin wings that cleanly the first time are people who have been waiting their whole lives to do it. I went to Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida for the F-22B course in 2013, and I came out of it a mission-qualified Raptor pilot. I called my father the day I finished. He picked up on the second ring. I told him I was on my way to my first squadron. He said, "F-22. Air-to-air pony. Foster's flying a 737 to Cabo this weekend." I hung up before I said something I could not take back. My mother called me back that night. She told me she was proud of me. I told her I knew she was. That was the entire conversation. My first squadron was the 27th Fighter Squadron at Joint Base Langley Eustis in Virginia. I reported in the summer of 2013, 25 years old, the youngest pilot in the squadron. I flew the F-22 out of that hangar for 4 years. I pinned on captain in December of 2014. My mother flew to Virginia and pinned the bars on my collar in the squadron commander's office on a Tuesday afternoon. There were 8 people in the room. None of them were my father. I started leaving my father out of the planning around that time. Not as punishment, just as math. The math always came out the same way. If I planned an event and he was on the list was wrong. If I planned an event and he was not on the list was right. I just stopped putting him on the list. In August of 2019, I was a senior captain assigned as the weapons officer for the 525th Fighter Squadron at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Alaska. We were the Air Defense Alert Squadron for the entire Northern Theater. The Russians flew Tu-95 Bear bombers down our air defense identification zone 3 or 4 times a year. Most of the time it was a quiet intercept. They flew the route, we flew next to them, we took pictures, they turned and went home, everybody went back to bed. On the night of August 14th, 2019, the alert klaxon went off at 22:37 hours. I had been in the squadron lounge with a book in my lap and a Gatorade on the table next to me, in my flight suit, in flight boots, 2 minutes from the jet. Phoenix flight scrambled. I was Phoenix 4, the number 4 pilot in a 4-ship of F-22 Raptors. The crew chiefs had the engines turning before I had finished climbing the ladder. We were wheels up at 22:44. 8 minutes off the rock, we went combat spread on 2 Tu-95 Bears at 27,000 feet, 200 miles off the Alaskan coast. And then the radar painted a second prong inbound from the west. 2 more Bears and a Tu-160 Blackjack in a different vector, coming in fast. The flight lead, Phoenix 1, made the call. He took Phoenix 2 and Phoenix 3 west to cover the new prong. He left me on the original pair. By myself. I held position on those 2 Bears for 93 minutes. Alone. The Raptor next to me had been replaced by empty sky, and the Bears could see that. They tested me. In the first 10 minutes, they tried a small turn south, low rate, to see if I would follow loosely. I followed tightly. In the next 20 minutes, they split, the lead Bear stepping out to my left, the wingman stepping out to my right, opening the wedge to see if I would commit to one and lose the other. I did not commit. I drifted center and held the geometry so they were both inside my radar cone. In the 40th minute, they tried a hard turn back toward Alaska, like they were going to push past me, and I matched them and gave them the call, in clear English on guard, that they had been given by every other F-22 pilot for 15 years. They turned away. They came back. They turned away again. They were testing the airframe. They could not see the second prong was being covered by the rest of my flight 150 miles to the west. As far as they knew, the United States Air Force had sent 1 airplane to meet 4 bombers, and they wanted to know if anybody was actually in it. I held the intercept. I made the radio calls, calmly. I did not give them a single thing they could use. I was 31 years old, and my flight lead was 150 miles away, and the cockpit was very quiet, and the Bears finally, in the 87th minute, turned. They went home. I followed them out for a clean 5 minutes to make sure they meant it. They meant it. I broke contact. I came home. When I rejoined Phoenix flight on the way back to base, Phoenix 1 came up on the radio. He said, "Phoenix 4, that was a hell of a save. You earned a call sign tonight." I had had a call sign before that flight. After that flight, I had a name. Within 6 months, the Distinguished Flying Cross was on my chest, and the name Phoenix 4 was in the F-22 community, the way certain names just become part of the air you breathe in a squadron. I did not put it there. The flight did. A week after the intercept, I called my mother from the BOQ at Elmendorf. She picked up on the first ring. She said, "Honey, are you okay? I saw the news." I told her I was fine. My father was in the background. He didn't pick up the second line. My mother said, "Your father will come around." I told her, "It's okay if he doesn't." I am going to walk you through one morning. It is the morning of September 25th, 2025, at Joint Base, Langley, Eustis, Virginia. I am 37 years old. I am a lieutenant colonel. In about 4 hours, the Wings Group commander is going to hand me the colors of the 27th Fighter Squadron, and I am going to become the squadron commander of the unit I first reported to as a brand new captain 12 years ago. The same hangar, the same parking lot, the same flight line. I parked my rental Subaru outside the 27th Fighter Squadron hangar at 6:52 in the morning. I wanted 10 minutes alone with the jets before anybody else got there. I knew the hangar was open early. I knew the crew chiefs would already be on the line prepping for the morning launch window. I had thought I could slip in, walk past the maintenance bay, stand at the back of the hangar where my old line locker used to be, and not bother anybody. I was wearing jeans, a worn flight jacket with no rank on it, and my hair in a low ponytail. I looked like a contractor's wife who had wandered onto the wrong base. Every fighter pilot has a hangar that meant something. This one was mine before it was anybody else's. I just wanted 10 minutes. I walked through the personnel door into the hangar floor. 4 Raptors were parked nose to tail with their access panels open, crew chiefs moving around them with checklists and headsets. At the nearest jet, 6 pilots in flight suits were standing in a half circle for the morning brief. I recognized the patches on their shoulders. The 27th Fighter Squadron. My squadron in about 4 hours. A tech sergeant was standing at the front of the half circle, telling a story with his hands. He had the squadron pilots laughing. I knew the look. He was the kingpin of the floor. Every fighter hangar has one. He runs the maintenance like it's his living room, and the lieutenants learn fast not to step on his toes. His name was Tech Sergeant Brody Larkin. I would not know his name for another 10 minutes. At that moment, he was just a man in coveralls with a clipboard and an audience. He saw me come in. He stepped off the brief and walked toward me, grinning. He said it loudly over his shoulder so the pilots would hear. "Lost, lady. Spouse tours are Saturdays." The pilots chuckled. Polite. I kept walking forward. I told him I was there for the squadron. He didn't read my tone. He turned back to the pilots and played to the room. He said, "She's here for the squadron, gents. Want to put her on the board?" The pilots laughed a little louder. I stopped walking. I looked at him. He turned back to me, still grinning. He said, "Tell us your call sign, ma'am. We'll write it up there." "How about sweetheart? How about sunshine?" One of the lieutenants laughed out loud. A captain hooked his helmet on 2 fingers and smirked. A major to the side of the half circle, whose head had been turning the whole time, took a half step forward. I saw her face. She was reading something in my posture that the men weren't. I did not raise my voice. I did not change my expression. I just said it. Phoenix 4. The hangar went quiet on a delay of about a second. The captain's helmet, hooked on 2 fingers, slipped and hit the concrete with a sound I am still not over. A second helmet hit a half beat later. A third hit after that. The major to the side snapped to attention so hard her boots cracked on the floor. A major behind her, who I would learn later was named Lincoln Hargrove, looked at Brody Larkin and said, "Low and clear. Sergeant, that's your new commander." Larkin's mouth opened. It closed. The captain whose helmet had hit first, a young man named Reese Calloway, said, "Ma'am." "Colonel Whitlock. I'm sorry, ma'am." The major who had snapped to attention saluted me. She held the salute. Every pilot in the hangar saluted me. I returned the salute. I did not say anything to Larkin yet. I turned to the major, who had saluted first, and I said, "Major, I'd like the morning brief to keep going." "I'll find the conference room when you're done." She said, "Ma'am." I turned and walked out of the hangar toward the squadron building. I had been Phoenix 4 for 7 years. I had never said the name out loud to embarrass anybody. I said it that morning because he asked. I sat in the squadron commander's office for 2 minutes before I did anything. The outgoing commander had already cleared out, the desk was empty, the walls were blank. I had a paper coffee cup from the squadron break room, and I sat in the chair behind the desk, and I drank coffee, and I breathed. There are 2 ways a hangar can humble you. One is when they don't know who you are, the other is when they finally do. I had been on the wrong end of both, and I will tell you, the second is the harder one, because in the second one, the silence in the room is about you, and you have to decide right then what kind of commander the next 24 months is going to have. I decided. I set the coffee cup down. I picked up the phone on the desk and I called the squadron orderly room and I asked for Major Schaefer. There was a knock at the office door 3 minutes later. Naomi Schaefer was the major who had saluted first. She was the squadron's director of operations. She was 34 years old. She walked into the office with Brody Larkin behind her. He was white. He stood very straight. I let the silence work for a moment. I said, "Sergeant Larkin, tell me what you thought you were doing." He said, "Ma'am, I didn't know who you were." I said, "I know what you thought. That's not what I asked." He said, "Ma'am." I was running my mouth. I was wrong. I held his eyes for a moment. I said, "I'm not going to chew you out, Sergeant. Major Schaefer is going to handle the paperwork. You're going to go back to your jet and do your job today. We'll figure out what happens after that." He said, "Ma'am." Schaefer escorted him out. He stopped at the door and turned back like he wanted to say something else, and I gave him a small nod, and he didn't say it, and he went. I did not move for another minute. I drank the rest of my coffee. I thought about how a hangar can be a stage in 2 different ways. I thought about how I had walked in wanting 10 minutes alone, and had instead been handed a moment that the squadron was going to be talking about For years, I thought about whether I had handled it correctly. I decided I had. I decided I had no interest in punishing Brody Larkin past what the paperwork was going to do on its own. He had embarrassed himself in front of his pilots. He was going to live with that. I did not need to add to it. My phone buzzed. My brother Foster. The text said, landed, renting a car. Dad's not coming. I had known. I sent back, okay, no emoji. The phone buzzed again. My mother. Honey, I'm at gate B14. I'll grab a cab to the base. I love you. I wrote back, send me the cab number. I'll pay it. I love you too. I got up. I walked to the small bathroom off the office. I looked in the mirror. I was 37 years old, in jeans and a flight jacket, with my hair coming out of the ponytail, looking at the woman who in 3.5 hours was going to be wearing service dress and accepting the squadron colors from a full colonel in front of every pilot and crew chief in the unit. I looked at myself for a long time. I thought about being 7 on the carpet flying a balsa F-18 over my head, while my father laughed into the inside of the refrigerator. I thought about being 14 at the workbench in the garage with my mother tying rudder lines with fishing knots. I thought about being 18 on the front walk in Beaufort with the USAFA letter in my hand and my mother crying at the sink. I thought about Brody Larkin's face when his mouth opened and nothing came out. I thought about my father in his living room in Beaufort, not coming. I thought about Vivian on a plane somewhere south of Atlanta with a small carry-on in the overhead bin, by herself coming to her daughter's change of command. I thought about Foster in a rental Tahoe on Interstate 64, also alone, also coming, with a sport coat on the passenger seat and a quiet decision in his chest he had not made yet about how he was going to translate today's events to his father when he got home. I decided I was done weighing one against the other. I had been doing the math my entire life, and the math always came out the same way. And at some point in your life, you have to stop running the calculation. The hangar that morning had given me what my family had never given me, which is the unambiguous recognition of who I actually was. I could either take that and walk forward with it, or I could spend the day waiting for my father to phone in his absence with an explanation that would not change anything. I hung the flight jacket on the back of the office door. I would change into service dress in the squadron locker room in an hour. The jacket stayed on the door. The change of command ceremony was at 1100 hours. The squadron's 4 Raptors sat at the back of the hangar as the backdrop. Folding chairs in rows, the wing colors at the front, the squadron colors next to them. The wing commander was a brigadier general. The group commander was a full colonel. The outgoing commander was a lieutenant colonel like me, 3 years senior. He handed the colors to the group commander. The group commander handed them to me. I accepted them. The hangar came to attention. The pilots from the morning were in the front row. Naomi Schaefer was on the aisle. Reese Calloway was next to her. Lincoln Hargrove was on the other side of the aisle. Thomas Beltran was behind them. Brody Larkin was at the back of the hangar in his Air Force service dress uniform, his hands behind his back. He did not look up at the front. My remarks were short. I had written them on the flight from Las Vegas to Norfolk 3 days ago. I had read them in the bathroom mirror of the BOQ the night before. I cut 3 sentences when I read them out loud. They were too long. They sounded like the kind of sentences a commander writes in the first week of command before she has any idea what she's actually going to do for the next 2 years, so I cut them. I kept the simple ones. I mentioned my mother by name. I did not mention my father. I mentioned the pilots who had flown Phoenix Flight with me in 2019, 2 of whom were squadron commanders elsewhere now and unable to attend. I told the squadron the truth. I told them this squadron had raised me as a captain and that it was my honor to lead it, and that I was going to spend the next 2 years giving back what it had given me. I told them that nobody in the room owed me their loyalty on the basis of the patch on my shoulder. I told them I would earn it the same way every commander earns it, which is by doing the work and by being in the squadron on the bad days. The room was quiet. I stepped down from the podium. The receiving line started. My mother was first. I hugged my mother in front of the entire room, and I did not care who was watching. I held her for a long time. She was wearing the blue cardigan she always wears to my events. She smelled like her own shampoo and a little like airplane coffee. She said, into my shoulder, "I'm so proud of you, honey." I said, "I know you are, Mom." She held my face for a second, and then she let me go and moved down the line. The group commander shook my hand. The wing commander shook my hand, then my brother Foster, in a navy sport coat, his hair gone gray at the temples in a way it hadn't been gray last Christmas. Foster said, "Addie, that was?" "Yeah." I said, "Thanks for coming, Foss." He said, "Dad said." I said, "I know what Dad said." The line moved. 40 minutes later, after the receiving line was done and the squadron had moved to the hangar bay for the reception, Foster and I were alone in the parking lot next to his rental Tahoe. The reception was loud behind us. We could hear it through the open hangar bay door. He had his hands in his coat pockets. He was looking at the squadron building, not at me. He had been standing in the parking lot for 10 minutes before I came out. I knew, because Naomi Schaefer had quietly told me my brother was outside. He said, "He's not mad at you. He's just..." I said, "Foster, don't translate him for me. Tell him I commanded a squadron today. Tell him Mom flew down by herself. Tell him I'm not asking for anything." Foster looked at me. He looked at me the way a person looks at another person they have known their entire life, but have suddenly noticed at a different angle, in different light. He had not looked at me like that since we were both children. He had not looked at me like that ever, actually. He was 41 years old, and he was wearing a sport coat over a polo shirt, and his hair was going gray at the temples in a way it had not been gray last Christmas. And he was looking at his little sister the way an honest man looks at something he has been mishandling for a long time. He said, "You know what? That's fair." He got in the Tahoe. He sat behind the wheel for a moment with the door open and the keys in his hand. He didn't say anything else. He closed the door. He started the engine. He drove off. That night, in the BOQ on base, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was 2 sentences long. "Adelaide, I would have come if I'd known it was going to be like that. Call me back." I listened to it twice. I did not call back. He had had 38 years to know it was going to be like that. I sat on the edge of the BOQ bed in my service dress trousers and a t-shirt. And I looked at the phone on the nightstand face down, and I turned the light out, and I went to sleep. I want to tell you what command is actually like, because most of what people imagine when they hear the word commander is not what command is. Command is not making big speeches. Command is reading paperwork at 6 in the morning so that your pilots don't have to. Command is sitting in the back of a brief and letting your director of operations run it, even when she runs it differently than you would have. Command is fixing the small things first. The broken coffee maker in the squadron lounge. The training schedule that has the same captain on the bad shift 3 weeks in a row because nobody has looked at it. The crew chief who has been working 12-hour days for 6 months because his boss is too lazy to rotate the schedule. You do the small things. You do them quickly, you do them visibly. And the squadron starts to feel different, not because you are loud, but because you are not. I spent the first month doing exactly that. By the middle of October, I had the schedule cleaned up, the lounge restocked, 3 crew chiefs on a normal rotation for the first time in months, and the coffee maker replaced. I had not made a single speech. The Larkin paperwork came across my desk in the second week of October. Naomi Schaefer brought it in. Reassignment to base operations, no loss of rank, no formal discipline letter in his personnel record. He kept his tech sergeant stripes. He did not keep this hanger. I read the package twice. I signed it. Naomi said, "Ma'am, for what it's worth, he asked me to tell you he was sorry." I said, "Tell him I said thank you for that. Tell him I wish him well at base ops." Naomi almost smiled. She did not actually smile. The director of operations of an F-22 squadron does not smile at her commander on a Tuesday morning at 07:30. But she came close. My mother flew down for a week at the end of October. She stayed in base lodging. I picked her up at Norfolk International myself in the squadron pickup, with the windows rolled down because the day was warmer than the forecast had said. She had brought 1 small suitcase, a tote bag, and a paperback. She always traveled with a paperback. She read in the evenings after dinner. She had been doing this her entire life. I drove her around the base. I showed her the hangar. I showed her the 4 Raptors on the line. I let her climb the maintenance ladder and look down into the cockpit of the jet on the end. She did not put her hands on anything she was not supposed to put her hands on. She knew the rules. She had been around flight lines for 40 years. She sat in the passenger seat afterward, and she looked at the Raptors for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "They're beautiful, honey." I said, "Yeah, Mom, they are." She came to work with me every day that week. She brought a thermos of coffee and a paperback, and she sat in the squadron lounge and she read while I did paperwork. The pilots came in for coffee, and they figured out who she was within about 40 minutes, and after that she had a permanent chair in the corner of the lounge for the rest of the week. The young captains started telling her things they would not have told me. By Thursday, she knew more about the squadron's actual climate than I did, and she fed me 3 useful observations over dinner at a Vietnamese place in Hampton that I would not have heard any other way. Naomi's husband hosted a backyard barbecue for the squadron officers and their families on a Saturday in early November. My mother went. She wore the blue cardigan. Naomi came up to me at the grill and said, "Ma'am, your mom is the only person in the squadron who didn't ask me a single tactical question all night. I love her." I said, "She's been to a lot of these." My father tried to call me in mid-November. I was in the jet for a Red Air training mission. I saw the missed call on the kneeboard when I shut the engines down. I did not return it. I was not punishing him. I was just letting him sit in a room I had been sitting in for 30 years. He could find his way around that room or he could not. Foster called me at the end of November. It was a different conversation than I had ever had with my brother. He said, "Hey, I owe you something. I don't know what it is yet. I just owe you something." I said, "Take Mom to dinner once a month for me." "That covers it," Foster said. "Deal." I taped a photograph of the squadron's first all-female 4 ship to the corkboard in my office a week later. I had led it. Naomi had flown my wing. 2 of our captains had been the second element. The photographer had been a wing public affairs sergeant standing on top of a stand of bleachers at the end of the runway with a long lens. He had timed the shot as we crossed the threshold at 500 feet in echelon. He had nailed it. My mother had ordered a print of it from the public affairs office and mailed it to me for my birthday, with a small note that said only, "The corkboard. Hang it." The corkboard had nothing else on it. Just the photograph. The Raptors in echelon, the 4 canopies catching the morning light, 4 pilots inside that the people who took the photograph could not even see. The letter from my father arrived in early December. It came in the squadron mail. It was a regular white envelope addressed to me in my father's handwriting, which is bad and angled. 3 pages of college ruled paper inside, folded into thirds. He did not apologize. He came close. He did not quite get there. The letter started with him telling me he had watched my brother solo a Cessna at 16 and that he had not watched my solo flight at 21 because he had been at a Delta-type rating ceremony in Atlanta. He told me he had thought at the time that this was a reasonable choice. He told me he had thought at the time that there would be other things to attend and that he had attended the other things, which there had not been because he had not attended them. He wrote, "I didn't understand what I was looking at when I looked at you." He wrote, "My own father never understood what he was looking at when he looked at me either." He did not ask for a response. He did not say, "Please write back." He just signed it, "Dad." Lowercase d, he did not say, "Sorry." He came as close as a man like him can come. I read the letter twice, once standing at the squadron mailbox in the small foyer at the back of the building where the squadron's post office boxes were, with my coat still on. I read the whole thing standing there. I had not planned to. I had been on my way to my office with a stack of paperwork in one arm and the letter just sitting on top of the pile, and I had seen the handwriting on the envelope and I had stopped walking. I read it once standing there. I did not breathe for a stretch in the middle that surprised me. When I got to the bottom of the 3rd page, I read the signature, "Dad," lowercase d. I folded the pages back into the envelope and I walked to my office. Then I sat in the office chair with the door closed and I read it again. Slower. I noticed that he had crossed out one sentence on the 2nd page and rewritten it underneath. The original sentence said, "I was wrong." The rewritten sentence said, "I have been wrong for a long time." He had decided the rewrite was more accurate. I noticed that he had used a Bic pen for the whole thing, the kind he had used my entire childhood, at the kitchen counter when he was filling out paperwork. I noticed that he had written my full name on the envelope. Adelaide Whitlock, not Addie. He had used my full name on purpose because Addie is the name my mother uses, and he was not pretending to be my mother. He was writing as himself. I did not cry. I folded the letter carefully along the existing creases. I put it in the office safe on top of my distinguished flying cross citation. Foster started showing up at my mother's house every other Sunday in late October and kept it going through the fall. He drove her to lunch. Sometimes my father was there. Sometimes my father was not. When my father was there, Foster told him about my squadron. He didn't brag. He just gave him facts. The size of the squadron, the number of jets, the first all-female 4-ship. My father listened. Foster told me later, on a phone call in early November, that the only question my father had ever asked during these updates was, "Is she happy?" Foster had said, "I think she is." My father had said, "Good." And that was the end of that part of the lunch. The wing commander observed one of my 4 ships in late January. He was a brigadier general. He had been in this job for 2 years. He had observed every squadron in the wing at least twice. He flew the number 4 jet himself on the mission in the wingman position. He was a former F-15 pilot. He had 800 hours in the Raptor. He could fly the airplane. He could also see a brief from the inside, which is the part of a wing commander observation that the squadron actually cares about. He sat at the back of the brief in the morning, and he did not say a word. He took notes on a yellow legal pad. He flew the mission. He came to the debrief. He sat at the back of the debrief, and he did not say a word during the first hour, and he asked one question in the second hour, which was a good question, and the squadron's lead instructor answered it correctly. After the debrief, in front of the entire squadron leadership, he said, "I want to be very clear. This is the cleanest squadron I have evaluated as a wing commander. Whatever you're doing, Colonel Whitlock, keep doing it." Naomi Schaefer was standing 2 feet behind me. Naomi did not change expression. Her posture did, though. She stood a little straighter. I noticed it. I think she noticed me noticing it. Neither of us said anything about it. I wrote my father back on the 1st of February. 1 page. I told him about the squadron. I told him my mother had come down in October. I told him there was going to be a Hangar family event in March. I told him he was welcome to come if he wanted to. I did not beg. I sealed the envelope. I walked it to the squadron post office in the cold, and I put it in the mail slot, and I walked back to my office in the January light. The magazine segment about the Pacific Intercept aired in early February. It had been in production for almost 2 years. The producer had interviewed me on a Tuesday afternoon at Nellis the previous spring and had told me she didn't know when it was going to air. She had said, sometime in the next year or so. I had stopped expecting it. It aired on a Thursday night. I did not watch it. I knew what was in it. I had been in it. I went to bed. My father watched it. He watched it alone, in the living room in Beaufort, in the recliner where he watched the news every night. My mother was in the kitchen, and she had left the news on because she knew the segment was on the schedule. She had not told my father what it was. She had just left the TV on and gone in to clean the kitchen. He had walked in mid-segment, sat down in his recliner with a cup of coffee, and looked up at the screen. The segment opened with a tanker shot of my Raptor alone against the 2 bears, taken by the KC-135 that had been topping off Phoenix flight in the air, refueling track to the west. The cockpit audio was playing under the visual. My voice on the radio. Calm. Talking to the bears in clear English, on guard. The bears holding position. The Raptor closing. My father sat forward in the recliner. He set his coffee on the side table without looking at it. The coffee was full. He had taken 1 sip. The segment ran 11 minutes. It walked through the intercept minute by minute. The producer had used the tanker tape, the air defense radar tape, and the cockpit audio together, layered them under each other, and let them run with no narration for the middle 5 minutes. Phoenix One's voice came in over the radio, handing off the western prong. Then my voice came back. Then there was a long stretch where my voice did not come back, and the radar tape showed the bears testing the geometry, and the only sound was the static of the radio and the hum of the cockpit. The producer had let that stretch run for almost a full minute without cutting away. My father, in the recliner, did not move. The segment named the pilots in Phoenix flight. It read the Distinguished Flying Cross citation out loud, in the voice of the narrator, slow. It closed with a still photograph of me in my flight suit, on the line, at Elmendorf, the wind catching my hair, a Raptor in the background. The narrator said my name. The narrator said, Phoenix 4. The credits rolled. My father sat very still. When the segment ended, he sat in the recliner for a long time. He did not pick up his coffee. He did not look toward the kitchen. He just sat. He did not call me. He called my mother. She was in the kitchen. She picked up. He said, Viv, I watched it. My mother said, "I know you did, honey." He said, "I should have been there." My mother said, "Yes, you should have been there." There was a pause. My father said, "Tell her I watched it." "Don't tell her I called you. Tell her later." My mother said, "I'll tell her when I tell her." She hung up. She did not cry. She just stood at the kitchen sink for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she put it down. Then she went back to washing the dish she had been washing. The water was still warm. She had been washing dishes for about 40 years. She knew how to keep washing dishes during a moment like that one. She kept washing. I was in the jet for a night sortie when the segment aired. I landed at 22:30 hours. I shut the engines down, climbed out of the cockpit, walked to the line shack, and got my phone out of my locker. Naomi Schaefer had texted me an hour earlier. The text said, "Your mom called. Said your dad watched the segment. That's it. She said to tell you later." I read the text standing on the ladder by my locker. I drove to the BOQ. I sat in the driver's seat of the squadron pickup in the dark parking lot for 10 minutes. I did not get out of the truck. I sat with my hands on the wheel and I thought. I thought about what it meant that my father had watched the segment. He had not gone looking for it. He had walked into the living room with a cup of coffee. He had sat down. He had looked up at the screen, and the screen had told him about his daughter's intercept, in detail, with the cockpit audio under it, for 11 minutes with no warning. He had not stood up. He had not changed the channel. He had sat there. That was the part that mattered. He had sat there and let the segment finish. He had then called my mother and not me, because he could not yet call me, and because he understood that he could not yet call me, which is a different kind of understanding than the understanding he had had at any other point in his life. I did not call him. I finished the night. I slept 4 hours. I led the morning 4 ship at 0700. At lunch, I wrote my mother a one-line text. "Tell him whenever you tell him. I'm fine." I had spent a lot of years waiting for my father to see me. I was not going to spend another year waiting for him to tell me that he had. That afternoon, I stood at the locker room mirror in my flight suit, zipping up after the morning sortie, looking at the patch on my right shoulder. A stylized phoenix and the numeral 4. The squadron leadership had made me a custom version of the patch in October. It was the only patch on the squadron that anybody had ever asked the wing commander to specifically authorize. The wing commander had authorized it without asking why. I ran a thumb over the patch. I closed my locker. The squadron held its first family hangar event of my command on a Saturday in mid-March. The Virginia weather had turned, but it was not yet hot. The flight line was clear. The 4 Raptors that had been on alert that morning were rolled into the hangar, the access panels closed, the canopies down, folding tables along the walls, coolers full of soft drinks, the squadron's crew chiefs and their families spilling out of the bay onto the apron, the pilots in their flight suits with their kids on their shoulders. The hangar smelled like burgers and JP8. I was in my flight suit, name tape over my heart, the Phoenix 4 patch on my shoulder, my flight cap in my back pocket. Naomi Schaefer was at my elbow. We watched a 4-year-old wearing aviator sunglasses that were 3 sizes too big for her run between 2 Raptors with a paper airplane held over her head, screaming. Naomi said, "Ma'am, the next generation of Phoenix 4 is right there." I said, "She has the sunglasses anyway." My mother came in through the personnel door at the back of the hangar with my brother. My mother in the blue cardigan, Foster in a polo and khakis. My mother saw me from across the bay, and her face changed in the way her face changes when she sees me in a flight suit in a hangar, which is the thing she has been doing for 15 years and which she has never gotten used to. I walked to her. She hugged me hard. She held me for a long time. Foster put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Dad sent you something." He took an envelope out of his coat pocket. White. Sealed. My father's bad angled handwriting on the front, just my name. Adelaide. I tucked the envelope into the chest pocket of my flight suit. I did not open it in front of them. Foster said he read the letter you sent him, twice. He said it like he was reporting a weather observation. He said it gently. I nodded. I said, "Thank you, Foss." Brody Larkin came in 20 minutes later. He was in civilian clothes, which surprised me. He had a small boy on his shoulders, 5 years old, in a Raptor t-shirt 3 sizes too big. Larkin was at base operations now. He had been there since October. I had seen him twice on base. Both times he had been correct and quiet. He had nodded. I had nodded back. We had not had a conversation. He walked up carefully. The kid on his shoulders was looking around the hangar with his mouth open. The kid had never been inside a fighter hangar in his life. You could see it in his face. He was looking at the Raptor like the Raptor was a dinosaur. Larkin said, "Ma'am, I just wanted to say." I said, "Sergeant Larkin, welcome back to the hangar. Get the kid a juice box from the cooler, would you?" Larkin smiled. "Small. Real," he said. "Yes, ma'am." He went to the cooler. The kid pointed at the Raptor. Larkin lifted him down and let him touch the wingtip. The kid touched the wingtip with one finger, like the wingtip might bite. Larkin said something to him I could not hear. Quiet. The kid nodded seriously. Naomi Schaefer was watching the whole exchange from across the hangar. She did not say anything. She just looked at me for a beat. Then she looked back at the 4-year-old with the sunglasses, who had now climbed onto the wheel of a Raptor with another kid and was about to be caught by her father, a captain in our squadron who I had personally cleared on the F-22 last month. The event wound down at 1700 hours. The families packed up, the crew chief swept the hangar floor, the Raptors stayed where they were, the canopies down, the chocks in place. My mother and Foster were going to dinner with me at a steakhouse in Hampton at 1900. They were going to drive their rental. I was going to drive the squadron pickup and meet them. I walked out of the hangar onto the flight line by myself. The sun was setting orange and low over the trees on the far side of the runway. The Virginia sky was that particular pale blue it gets at the end of a March day. The kind of blue that holds onto the light for a long time after the sun has actually gone. The flight line lamps had not come on yet. A C-17 was holding short of the parallel runway in the distance, waiting for a taxi clearance, its anti-collision light winking slow against the trees. I could hear it from a half-mile away. I walked past the wing chocks, past the last Raptor, all the way out to the white line at the edge of the apron. The flight line was empty behind me. The hangar was lit gold inside, the families packing up, somebody laughing. I took the envelope out of my flight suit pocket. I opened it carefully. One sheet. College ruled. My father's bad angled handwriting. Adelaide. I watched it. I should have been at the wing ceremony. I should have been at all of them. I am proud of you, and I have been proud of you for longer than I have known how to say it. Dad. Lowercase d. I read it once. I read it again. I read the second line 3 times. I should have been at the wing ceremony. I should have been at all of them. He had named the specific one. He had named the one that had been the hardest one. He had been able, when he sat down at the kitchen counter in Beaufort with the Bic pen, to remember which one it had been. I had not known he had ever known. I had assumed he had not even held the dates in his head. He had held them in his head. He had held the wing ceremony in his head for 13 years. I folded the letter carefully along the existing creases. I put it back in the chest pocket of my flight suit. I did not cry. I breathed out, slow. I stood on the white line at the edge of the apron, and I watched the sun go down. The C-17 in the distance got its taxi clearance and began to move. The hangar behind me dimmed as the families finished packing up. Somebody, behind me, called out a kid's name. The kid came running. I did not turn around. Here's what I learned, and I am telling you because you might need to hear it. The respect you have to ask for never feels like the kind you wanted. The respect you don't have to ask for arrives quietly, and it almost always arrives later than it should have. If you are waiting for somebody to see you, do the work anyway. Do the work because the work is the thing. The seeing is somebody else's job. If they do it, you will know. If they don't, you will still have done the work. That has to be enough, and most of the time, it is. My mother and Foster were at the steakhouse in Hampton at 1900. I had 2 hours, I stood on the white line, and I watched the sun go the rest of the way down. The hangar behind me was lit gold from the sodium lights. The 4 Raptors were silent inside. I had my hands in the pockets of my flight suit. The letter was in the chest pocket, against the patch with the stylized phoenix and the numeral 4. The patch had been sewn there by the squadron seamstress at JBLE in October. She had asked me, when I had handed it to her, what it was. I had told her it was a flight call sign. She had nodded once, sewn it on without saying anything else, and handed me the flight suit back 10 minutes later. She had not asked anything else about it. She knew her job. Her job was patches, not stories. I thought about that, standing on the white line. I thought about how many people I had met in the Air Force, whose job was the thing in front of them, and who did not need to know the story behind it to do the thing in front of them well. I thought about how my father had spent his whole life needing to know the story behind everything before he was willing to take it seriously, and how that had cost him something he would not get back. I thought about my mother, who had never once asked me for a story before she took something I told her seriously. She had just believed me. She had built me a balsa airplane in a garage in 2003, and she had told me that the F-22 was the one I would fly, and she had taken that on faith for 23 years, and she had been right. I walked back across the flight line in the last of the March light. The hangar door was rolled half closed. Naomi Schaefer was standing in the gap with her hands in her flight suit pockets, looking out. She watched me walk back. She did not wave. She just stood there and watched me come in. When I got close, she said, "Ma'am." "Steakhouse," I said. "On my way." She nodded once. She held the door open for me. I walked through it and through the hangar and out to the parking lot, and I drove to Hampton, and I had dinner with my mother and my brother, and I did not tell them about the letter, and my mother knew I had read it, and Foster knew I had read it, and we did not talk about it. We talked about other things. We laughed twice. My mother told me about a former student she had run into in the produce section of the grocery store last week who was now a doctor. Foster told a story about a flight attendant on a Boeing 767. I drove them back to their hotel after dinner. I hugged my mother in the lobby. She held me for a long time. She did not say anything. She just held me. I drove back to the BOQ. I sat on the edge of the bed in my flight suit. I took the letter out of the chest pocket. I read it one more time. I put it on the nightstand. I turned the light out. If you stayed with me to the end of this one, thank you. I don't tell this story often. Most of the people who know me never heard me tell it. If you've ever been the person in the room nobody knew, or if you have a parent who has loved you from a distance for longer than they have known how to say it, I want to hear from you in the comments. Did you have a father like Hollis? Did you have a mother like Vivian? Did the letter come yet, or are you still waiting on it? Tell me. And if this story meant something to you, please subscribe.